Mr. Perfect was one of wrestling's greatest performers. He had everything Vince McMahon wanted in a champion: the looks, the talent, the charisma. But backstage politics destroyed his chances at the top prize. Despite being positioned as one of the company's premier heels with Bobby Heenan by his side, Vince never made him a world champion. This is the story of how Mr. Perfect's quest for wrestling perfection was sabotaged by the very people who should have supported him. Growing up around wrestling from before he could walk, Curt faced the mixed blessing that came with being Larry, the Axe Hennig's son. His father was already a legend in the American Wrestling Association. Larry had made his name as a tough, no-nonsense competitor who could work with anyone and make them look good. He was respected by promoters and feared by opponents. But having a famous wrestling father meant living under enormous pressure and constant scrutiny. Every time young Curt stepped foot in a gym or wrestling school, people watched him differently. They expected him to be as tough as his old man. They expected him to have that same natural instinct for the business. Most importantly, they expected him to prove he belonged there on his own merit, not just because of his last name. He excelled in football, baseball, and amateur wrestling at Robbinsdale High School in Minnesota, and was widely regarded by coaches as a college-level athlete. His baseball skills were equally strong, with scouts taking notice of his arm strength and batting ability. But it was amateur wrestling where he really stood out. He dominated his high school competition and showed the technical skills that would later make him famous. Teachers and coaches could see he was different from other athletes. He had that perfectionist mentality that pushed him to be better than everyone else. At Vern's training camp, he proved he wasn't just riding his father's coattails. The camp was known for being brutal. Vern would push wrestlers to their physical and mental limits. Many hopefuls quit within the first few weeks. Others were told they didn't have what it takes and were sent home. But Curt graduated from Verna's famously demanding camp, displaying technical skills that impressed even veteran wrestlers who had been in the business for decades. His footwork was smooth. His timing was natural. Most importantly, he understood ring psychology in a way that usually takes years to develop. The Minnesota wrestling scene was brutal and competitive, with no room for nepotism or weakness. The AWA territory was home to some of the toughest wrestlers in the business. Veterans like Nick Bockwinkel, Bobby Heenan, and Rick Martel set the standard for excellence. If you couldn't work at their level, you wouldn't last long. Promoters had no patience for wrestlers who couldn't draw money or deliver quality matches. Family connections might get you a tryout, but they wouldn't keep you employed if you couldn't perform. Young wrestlers who couldn't cut it were quickly weeded out, regardless of their last name. Vern had seen plenty of wrestlers' sons try to follow in their father's footsteps. Most of them failed because they thought the name alone would carry them. They lacked the dedication and natural ability needed to succeed. The wrestling business has always been unforgiving to those who don't respect it or work hard enough to master it. But Curt had something special that set him apart from other second-generation wrestlers. He had a combination of his father's toughness and his own perfectionist mentality. He wasn't satisfied with being good enough or just getting by on his name. He wanted to be the best at everything he did. This drive would later become the foundation of his Mr. Perfect character, but even as a teenager, people could see he had that obsessive need to excel. By age 20, he was ready to step into the ring professionally, carrying not just his father's legacy, but his own burning ambition. He had spent years preparing for this moment. The training was complete. The foundation was solid. But the real test was about to begin as he entered a wrestling world where reputation meant everything, and one mistake could end a career before it started. Making his professional debut on January 30th, 1980, at just 20 years old, Hennig stepped into the territorial wrestling system where careers were made or broken. This wasn't like today's wrestling where one company controls everything. Back then, the country was divided into different wrestling territories. Each territory had its own promoter, its own stars, and its own way of doing business. A wrestler had to prove himself in multiple territories before anyone would consider him a real star. He worked in the Pacific Northwest and other territories far from his Minnesota home. He started as a babyface, the good guy that fans were supposed to cheer for. The crowds didn't know him yet. They didn't care about his famous father or his amateur wrestling credentials. All that mattered was what he could do between the ropes. Wrestling promoters were looking for one thing. Could this kid draw money and put on entertaining matches night after night? His brief 1981 stint in the WWE ended quickly, raising questions about whether he was ready for the big time or if he needed more seasoning. Vince McMahon Sr. was still running the company then, and he had strict standards for who could work in his territory. Hennig lasted only a few months before he was sent back to smaller territories. Some people saw this as a failure. Others viewed it as a learning experience. The truth was probably somewhere in between. He had the talent, but he wasn't polished enough yet for the biggest stage in wrestling. Returning to the AWA in 1982, he faced the challenge of proving himself without relying on his father's name. Verne Gagne gave him opportunities, but Verne was known for being tough on everyone, including wrestlers' sons. He had no patience for performers who couldn't live up to their potential. Hennig started at the bottom of the card, working preliminary matches before the main events. He had to earn respect from veteran wrestlers who had worked with his father. They watched him closely, looking for any sign that he thought he was better than them because of his family connections. The territorial system was unforgiving in ways that modern wrestling fans can't imagine. Wrestlers traveled from town to town, working multiple matches a week for small crowds with no guaranteed contracts or health insurance. They drove their own cars, paid for their own gas, and split hotel rooms to save money. If you got injured, you didn't get paid. If the crowds didn't like you, promoters stopped booking you. Hennig worked as an undercard talent early on and learned ring psychology from veterans who taught him the fundamentals that would serve him throughout his career. He studied how veteran wrestlers controlled crowds and told stories in the ring. He learned when to speed up the pace and when to slow things down. Most importantly, he discovered how to make his opponents look good while still getting himself over with the fans. This skill would become one of his greatest strengths throughout his entire career. His technical skills improved dramatically during this period, as he studied tape and worked with veteran performers. He spent hours watching matches from legendary wrestlers like Lou Thesz and Billy Robinson. He picked up subtle techniques that most wrestlers never bothered to learn. His footwork became smoother. His transitions between moves looked more natural. He developed that rare ability to make everything look effortless while actually working incredibly hard to perfect every detail. The grind was brutal, but it taught him how to work hurt, how to adapt to different crowds, and how to carry weaker wrestlers to better matches than they deserved. These lessons couldn't be taught in wrestling school. They had to be earned through years of experience in small towns across the country. By the mid-1980s, he had transformed from a promising rookie into a polished performer ready for main event status. The territorial system had forged him into something special, a wrestler who understood both the art and the business. Wrestling observers were starting to take notice of his work, and bigger opportunities were about to present themselves. The AWA World Heavyweight Championship became the prize that would define Hennig's career in territorial wrestling. The American Wrestling Association was Verne's baby. He had built it from nothing into one of the most respected wrestling territories in the country. Stars like Hulk Hogan, Jesse Ventura, and Rick Martel had all made their names there before moving on to bigger things. Now it was Hennig's turn to prove he belonged in that company. Teaming with Scott Hall to win the AWA World Tag Team Championship on January 18, 1986, was just the beginning of Hennig's rise to the top. Hall was already establishing himself as one of the smoothest workers in the business. He had natural charisma and could talk his way into any storyline. Together, they made a dangerous combination. Hennig brought the technical skills and family credibility. Hall brought the attitude and mic work. Their chemistry was obvious from their first match together. They understood each other's timing and could anticipate what the other would do in any situation. The Tag Team Championship run showed Hennig could work at the main event level. He wasn't just carrying weaker wrestlers anymore. He was working with established stars and holding his own. The crowds responded to his confidence and athletic ability. Wrestling observers started writing about his potential as a singles star. Promoters in other territories began asking Verne about his availability for special attractions. Everything was building towards something bigger. The real test came when he pursued the AWA World Heavyweight Championship, facing the legendary Nick Bockwinkel, who had held the title for years. Bockwinkel was everything a world champion should be. He looked like money in his expensive suits. He could wrestle any style and make it look easy. Most importantly, he understood how to be a heel champion without killing business. Fans hated him, but they paid to see him lose. That's the mark of a great champion. When Hennig defeated Nick Bockwinkel for the AWA World Heavyweight Championship in May 1987, it felt like a genuine changing of the guard. His 53-week reign established him as one of the premier wrestlers in the territory system. This wasn't a short transitional reign or a fluke victory. He held the title for over a year, defending it against all comers. Every defense was a main event. Every match had to deliver because the AWA's reputation depended on their champion being able to work with anyone and make it look believable. Hennig's matches during this period showcased his incredible technical ability and natural charisma. The background research repeatedly praises his ability to adapt his style to any opponent. He could work lengthy technical matches with wrestlers like Bockwinkel, showcasing his mat skills and ring psychology. Against brawlers like Bruiser Brody, he could adjust to a more physical style without losing his technical edge. This versatility made him valuable to promoters who needed a champion capable of working with different types of wrestlers. His feuds with top stars like Jerry Lawler and Greg Gagne drew huge crowds throughout the Midwest. However, the AWA was declining in the late 1980s, which gave Hennig prominence but limited his long-term national exposure. The Lawler matches were particularly special because both men understood Southern-style psychology. They could work a crowd into a frenzy without relying on high spots or complex sequences. The Greg feud had built-in drama because of the Hennig family's history with Vern Gagne. Wrestling observers began to take notice, praising his in-ring psychology and storytelling ability. Dave Meltzer and other wrestling journalists started featuring his matches in their newsletters. They recognized that something special was happening in the AWA. By 1987, Vince McMahon was watching, recognizing that Hennig had everything needed to succeed on the national stage. The AWA had been his proving ground, but the wrestling world was changing rapidly. National expansion was the future, and Hennig would need more than just technical excellence to make his mark on a bigger stage. McMahon's creative team knew they had to build something bigger than just another talented wrestler. When Hennig arrived in the WWE in 1988, the company had big plans for him. But first they needed to create the perfect persona. McMahon's team had watched Hennig's work in the AWA. They saw his athletic ability and his natural arrogance. They recognized that he had the look and skills to be a top heel in their expanding national territory. But the WWE was different from the regional territories. Characters needed to be bigger and more defined. The Mr. Perfect character was a risk that could have destroyed Hennig's career before it started. Claiming to be perfect at everything could easily backfire if fans didn't buy into it. Wrestling fans were smart. They could spot a fake from a mile away. If Hennig couldn't back up his claims of perfection, the character would become a joke. Hennig reportedly did not initially like the Mr. Perfect gimmick and preferred a cowboy character, but he accepted and elevated the concept beyond what anyone expected. Vignettes started airing in October 1988, and Hennig debuted the character on TV as Mr. Perfect in early October 1988. The vignettes showing Perfect's athletic accomplishments were groundbreaking for their time, featuring real sports demonstrations that no other wrestler had attempted. His half-court basketball shots, perfect 300 bowling games, and catching Hail Mary passes weren't staged or edited. These were actual athletic feats that required genuine skill and practice. The vignettes even featured cameos from real sports figures, adding legitimacy to his claims of athletic superiority. Hennig would spend hours practicing these shots before filming. He treated each vignette like a wrestling match that he had to win. His perfectionist mentality extended beyond the wrestling ring into every aspect of his character. Those vignettes created the aura that would fuel a year-long undefeated run on television, establishing him as one of the most protected wrestlers in the company. The character worked because it was rooted in truth. Hennig really was an exceptional athlete who excelled at multiple sports. This authenticity came through on television in ways that scripted characters never could. Fans might hate Mr. Perfect's arrogance, but they couldn't argue with the evidence they saw on their screens. The character became believable because the man playing it actually possessed those abilities. His cocky, arrogant personality was the perfect heel character for the late 1980s WWE. The company was transitioning from regional territory wrestling to national entertainment. They needed villains who could generate heat from coast to coast. Mr. Perfect's attitude worked everywhere. Small-town fans hated his big city arrogance. City fans hated his claims of superiority. Everyone found something to dislike about this wrestler who thought he was better than them. Fans loved to hate him, but they also couldn't deny his incredible in-ring ability. This created the perfect dynamic for a heel wrestler. People paid to see him lose, but they also respected his skills enough to keep watching. He could work with fan favorites like Hulk Hogan and make them look good while still maintaining his heel character. The Mr. Perfect character was an instant hit, giving Hennig the platform he needed to showcase his talents on a national stage. Television audiences across the country were seeing his work for the first time. Wrestling magazines started featuring him on covers. Merchandise sales proved that fans were connecting with the character despite hating everything he represented. But with success came new pressures that would test every aspect of his perfect persona. Every match would carry enormous weight, and maintaining that image of perfection was about to become the biggest challenge of his career. The undefeated streak became the foundation of Mr. Perfect's entire character. Wrestling promoters love undefeated streaks because they create easy storylines and build anticipation for the eventual loss. But for the wrestler carrying that streak, every match becomes a potential disaster. One bad night, one blown spot, one backstage decision could end months of careful character building in a matter of minutes. Mr. Perfect remained unbeaten on television for over a year, making him one of the most protected wrestlers in the company. WWE booking protected the streak as a deliberate strategy to build him as a top heel. The company was expanding nationally, and they needed strong characters that fans could believe in. An undefeated wrestler was valuable because it gave the impression that their roster was filled with legitimate tough guys. Hennig's streak wasn't accidental. It was a calculated business decision designed to establish him as a major player. Every match carried the risk of ending the streak, and backstage politics often determined who would get that honor. Wrestling matches are predetermined, but the decision of who wins and loses involves complex negotiations between promoters, bookers, and sometimes the wrestlers themselves. Hennig's undefeated streak meant that every opponent knew they weren't going over. This could create resentment in the locker room if wrestlers felt they deserved a win more than Hennig deserved to keep his streak alive. His feuds with opponents like the Blue Blazer, Owen Hart working under a mask, and the Red Rooster, Terry Taylor, showcased his ability to make even mid-card opponents look credible. The Blue Blazer played a clean-cut superhero character that was the opposite of Mr. Perfect's arrogant persona. The Red Rooster was a solid wrestler who had been saddled with a ridiculous gimmick. Both men were talented performers who deserved better than their current positions. Working with Hennig gave them a chance to show what they could do in longer, more meaningful matches. The streak wasn't just about winning matches. It was about winning them in convincing fashion while maintaining his perfect persona. Hennig couldn't just barely squeeze out victories or win through lucky breaks. Every win had to look dominant and effortless. This required careful planning and execution. He had to work with his opponents to create matches that told the right story while protecting his character's credibility. One sloppy victory could damage months of character development. His first pinfall loss came at Madison Square Garden to the Ultimate Warrior on March 19, 1990, though this was a regional MSG event rather than national television. His first singles loss on national pay-per-view television came to Brutus Beefcake at WrestleMania 6. These milestones marked the calculated end of his unbeaten run. But by then, the damage was done. Mr. Perfect had been established as a legitimate threat to anyone on the roster. Fans began to anticipate who might finally defeat the perfect wrestler, creating natural storylines and feuds. The streak became its own attraction. Wrestling magazines speculated about potential opponents. Fans at live events would chant for their favorites to be the one to end the streak. This anticipation was valuable for the company because it kept people interested in Mr. Perfect's matches even when the outcomes were predictable. The streak established Mr. Perfect as a legitimate main event player, proving he could carry storylines and deliver consistently good matches against different types of opponents. He had credibility with both hardcore wrestling fans and casual viewers. Hennig would later become his manager and add a crucial mouthpiece to the act. But the real test of his perfect persona was about to come in the form of championship gold that would define his entire WWE career. Winning the Intercontinental Championship would prove whether his perfect persona could translate into championship success. The Intercontinental Championship was often considered a stepping stone to the WWE Championship, but for some wrestlers it became their career-defining achievement. In the wrestling world, the IC title carried special meaning. It was the championship for wrestlers who could work. Technical ability mattered more than size or politics. Champions like Ricky Steamboat, Randy Savage, and Honky Tonk Man had all used the title to establish their credentials. For Mr. Perfect, this championship would represent the pinnacle of his wrestling excellence. In May 1990, he won the vacant Intercontinental Championship, defeating Tito Santana in the tournament final. Santana was a respected veteran who had held the title twice before. He was known for his technical skills and his ability to work with anyone on the roster. The tournament format gave Hennig's victory additional credibility since he had to defeat multiple opponents to claim the vacant title. His victory was clean and decisive, establishing him as a legitimate champion from day one. He held the Intercontinental title for about 15 months, from May 1990 until August 1991, but questions lingered about whether this was as high as he would ever climb in the company. Backstage, wrestlers and office personnel were already discussing Hennig's future. Some believed he had everything needed to be WWE champion. Others pointed to Vince McMahon's preference for larger, more physically imposing champions. The Intercontinental Championship had launched careers like Hulk Hogan's to the next level. Whether it would do the same for Hennig remained to be seen. His defenses against Big Boss Man at WrestleMania 7, Brutus Beefcake, and Kerry Von Erich showcased his versatility as a champion. The Beefcake matches were interesting because both men were heels, which created unique dynamics. Von Erich brought his own credibility as a former NWA World Champion and member of the famous Von Erich wrestling family. Each defense required Hennig to adapt his style and approach. Against power wrestlers, he used his speed and technical skills. Against technical wrestlers, he relied on his athleticism and ring psychology. This adaptability made him valuable to the company's booking team. Perfect's matches during this period were consistently rated among the best on every card he appeared on. Wrestling observers took notice of his work rate and consistency. He rarely had a bad match, even when working with wrestlers who had limited skills. His ability to carry weaker opponents to good matches made him an asset to the company. Promoters could put him in the ring with almost anyone and expect a solid performance that would entertain the crowd. The Intercontinental Championship was considered the workhorse belt that rewarded in-ring ability, and Hennig's technical skill fit the championship perfectly. His appearance at WrestleMania 7 demonstrated his importance to the company's biggest events. WrestleMania was the WWE's showcase event, and only top stars got meaningful spots on the card. His presence at WrestleMania confirmed his status as one of the company's premier performers. The title reign established him as the measuring stick for technical excellence in the WWE. Other wrestlers were compared to Mr. Perfect's standards. His matches set the bar for what an Intercontinental Championship defense should look like. Wrestling schools used his matches as teaching tools for students learning ring psychology and match structure. He became the standard that other technical wrestlers tried to reach. Behind the scenes, discussions about his future began to include potential main event programs and championship opportunities. Office personnel started talking about him in the same conversations as Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior. His name came up when planners discussed long-term storylines and pay-per-view main events. The foundation was being laid for his eventual push to the top of the company. But one title defense would change everything about his career trajectory. What should have been another routine championship match would instead become both his greatest triumph and his most costly victory. Summerslam, 1991, August 26th, Madison Square Garden was packed that night. The crowd was electric. Mr. Perfect had been Intercontinental champion for over a year. He had beaten everyone they put in front of him. Bret Hart was the challenger, a technical wrestler from the famous Hart wrestling family. On paper, it looked like another routine defense for the perfect wrestler. The match between Mr. Perfect and Bret Hart at SummerSlam. 1991 is still considered one of the greatest Intercontinental Championship matches ever. Wrestling historians study this match. They break down every move and every sequence. The technical wrestling was flawless. Both men understood ring psychology better than most wrestlers ever would. They told a complete story in 18 minutes. The crowd was invested from the opening bell to the final pinfall. What fans didn't know was that Hennig was wrestling with a broken tailbone and bulging discs, risking his career with every move. He had been dealing with back problems for months. The injury had gotten worse during recent matches. Doctors had told him to take time off. He refused because losing the title would hurt his position in the company. He decided to work through the pain and hope for the best. The pain was excruciating. Every bump hurt. Every time Hart lifted him for a move, Hennig felt sharp pains shooting through his spine. He couldn't let it show on his face. Wrestling fans can spot weakness immediately. If they sensed he was hurt, it would ruin the match and damage his character. He had to perform like everything was normal while his body was breaking down. The 18-minute classic showcased both men at their absolute best, with technical wrestling that few could match. Hart worked holds that looked devastating but were actually safe for both wrestlers. Hennig countered with moves that showed his athletic ability without putting too much stress on his injured back. They built the match slowly, adding intensity as it progressed. The crowd got louder with each near fall. Bret Hart won the match and the title at SummerSlam 1991. Hennig later revealed he had a broken tailbone and bulging discs and wrestled the match through excruciating pain. He wrestled through a broken tailbone and bulging discs, injuries that would significantly limit his in-ring future. What should have been a temporary setback became a permanent problem. His movement in the ring was never the same. He couldn't take the bumps he used to take. High-impact moves became impossible. Wrestling observers gave the match 5 stars, and Bret Hart later called it one of his best matches. Dave Meltzer and other respected journalists rated it highly. The match was featured on highlight reels and best-of compilations. But while everyone celebrated the artistic achievement, Hennig was dealing with the physical consequences that would change his entire career trajectory. His transition to commentary and behind-the-scenes roles was presented as a choice, but it was really a medical necessity. The company told fans that Mr. Perfect was taking on new responsibilities. They said he wanted to expand his role beyond just wrestling. The truth was that his body couldn't handle full-time wrestling anymore. He needed time to heal and figure out what came next. The match that should have elevated both men instead became the moment when Mr. Perfect's championship dreams began to fade. Hart went on to bigger things. He eventually won the WWE Championship and became one of the company's top stars. For Hennig, this match represented the peak of his in-ring career. Everything after this would be a struggle against his own physical limitations. The injury would force him to reinvent his role in the company, but it also robbed wrestling of one of its greatest performers. Yet, even with his body failing him, the real obstacles to his championship aspirations weren't just physical. The decisions that would truly determine his fate were being made in places where fans never looked. Wrestling boardrooms and backstage conversations determine careers in ways fans never understand. And for Mr. Perfect, those decisions crushed his championship dreams. Wrestling fans only see what happens in the ring and on television. They don't know about the meetings where careers are made or destroyed. They don't hear the conversations between promoters and bookers that determine who gets pushed and who gets buried. For Curt Hennig, these behind-the-scenes decisions would cost him the one thing he wanted most: the WWE Championship. Multiple sources and people in the business say Hennig was never seriously pushed to the WWE Championship. Contemporaries point to Vince McMahon's preference for larger, more marketable champions and backstage politics as important factors. This was shocking to people in the wrestling business who watched his work. He had everything a world champion needed. He could work with anyone. He could cut decent promos. He had the look and the athletic ability. Most importantly, he drew money and got reactions from crowds everywhere he went. But none of that mattered if the boss didn't see him as championship material. The reasons varied depending on who you asked in the wrestling business. Some people said it was his size that worked against him. McMahon had always preferred larger champions like Hulk Hogan and Ultimate Warrior. Hennig was around 6 feet tall and weighed about 260 pounds. That made him bigger than most wrestlers, but not big enough for McMahon's vision of what a world champion should look like. Others pointed to backstage heat and political issues that created problems for Hennig's career advancement. McMahon's preference for larger, more physically imposing champions worked against Hennig throughout his career. The boss wanted champions who looked like superheroes or movie stars. He wanted wrestlers who would photograph well and look impressive on television. Hennig was athletic and good-looking, but he didn't have the massive physique that McMahon associated with main event stars. This preference wasn't unusual in wrestling, but it limited opportunities for talented wrestlers who didn't fit the physical mold. Reports suggest that promises of a world title push were made but never fulfilled, leading to frustration and resentment. People in the wrestling business talked about conversations where Hennig was told his time would come. He was assured that the company had big plans for him. These promises kept him motivated and loyal to the organization. But months turned into years, and the promised push never materialized. This created tension and disappointment that affected his relationship with management. He feuded with Hogan during his heel run. Later, in late 1992, he turned babyface, notably teaming with Randy Savage at Survivor Series 1992 in a bid to re-establish singles momentum. Turning Hennig from heel to babyface was a major decision. The Mr. Perfect character had been successful as a villain. Changing that dynamic was risky. Some people believed this was management's way of testing whether Hennig could work as a top good guy. Others saw it as a desperate attempt to salvage his main event potential after years of political problems. Backstage politics in the WWE were notoriously complex during this period. Multiple factors influenced who got pushed and who didn't. Personal relationships mattered. Political alliances affected booking decisions. Some wrestlers had agents or advocates who fought for their interests. Others had to navigate the system on their own. Success required more than just wrestling ability. It required understanding how to play the backstage game and build the right relationships. Sources paint a mixed picture. Hennig was widely respected and generous with knowledge, but his perfectionism and frankness may have created friction in some backstage relationships. His attention to detail and high standards were assets in the ring, but those same qualities could make him difficult to work with behind the scenes. He expected everyone to meet his level of professionalism. When they didn't, he wasn't afraid to speak up. Hennig cashed a Lloyd's of London disability policy tied to his post-injury condition. Later disputes over payments and his frustration with how the company handled his return contributed to tensions that factored into his jump to WCW. The combination of injury and politics effectively ended his chances of ever becoming WWE champion, despite having all the tools to succeed. His back problems limited his in-ring time just when he needed to be at his best. At the same time, backstage issues prevented him from getting the opportunities he deserved. By the mid-1990s, it became clear that Hennig would need to look elsewhere for the career revival that had eluded him in the WWE. He jumped to WCW in mid-1997 and reintroduced himself under his real name, hoping the Monday Night Wars would offer the main event opportunities that had eluded him. Wrestling fans love comeback stories. They want to see their heroes overcome obstacles and find success in new places. When Curt Hennig left the WWE, many people hoped that World Championship Wrestling would give him the push he never got up north. The Monday Night Wars were at their peak. WCW was signing big names and giving them main event opportunities. It seemed like the perfect time for Hennig to reinvent himself. Eric Bischoff was running WCW, and he was willing to spend money to compete with Vince McMahon. The company was signing former WWE stars and putting them in prominent positions. Hennig's reputation as a technical wrestler made him attractive to WCW bookers. They saw him as someone who could work with their younger talent and help elevate the overall quality of their matches. The timing seemed perfect for a fresh start in a company that valued wrestling ability. Joining the Four Horsemen and later the NWO showed he could still adapt to new situations, but his physical limitations were becoming more apparent. The Four Horsemen were WCW's most prestigious stable. Being invited to join meant the company viewed him as a main event caliber performer. He worked alongside Ric Flair, Chris Benoit, and Dean Malenko. These were wrestlers who appreciated technical excellence and ring psychology. Later, his inclusion in the NWO Wolfpack gave him another high-profile storyline. But people who worked with him noticed he wasn't the same physically. He won the United States Heavyweight Championship in 1997, proving he could still carry feuds and draw money when healthy. His back issues limited what he could do, but he still had strong programs with Diamond Dallas Page and Chris Benoit. The DDP matches were particularly good because both men understood how to work around physical limitations. Page had his own injury history and knew how to structure matches that looked spectacular without being overly dangerous. The Benoit feuds showcased technical wrestling at its finest. Working with him brought out the best in Hennig's remaining abilities. The United States Championship reigns gave him gold around his waist again, though they felt like consolation prizes compared to his earlier success. Winning the U.S. title should have been a career highlight. The championship had history and prestige in WCW. Previous holders included Sting, Lex Luger, and other main event stars. But for Hennig, these reigns reminded him of what he was capable of achieving. The U.S. title was treated as a secondary championship, but it proved he could still be trusted with meaningful storylines. His time with the West Texas Rednecks was entertaining and showed his personality outside of wrestling. The group was formed as part of a country music storyline that became unexpectedly popular with fans. Hennig recorded the song "Rap is Crap" and played guitar with the band. It was fun television that connected with audiences in ways nobody expected. He also rebranded his fisherman suplex as the Hennigplex, giving his signature move a more personal identity. These creative touches showed he was still engaged with his character work. WCW's shifting creative leadership and last-minute changes made it hard for any performer to gain long-term momentum. Hennig was no exception. The company was notorious for script changes and political backstage maneuvering. Wrestlers never knew what their storylines would be from week to week. This instability made it difficult for anyone to build consistent characters or develop meaningful feuds. The Monday Night Wars period was exciting for wrestling fans, but for Hennig it represented both opportunity and frustration. While the wrestling business was experiencing unprecedented growth and mainstream attention, his own body was betraying him. The physical demands that had once been second nature now required careful management and constant pain medication. Success in WCW extended his career, but it couldn't recapture the magic of his Mr. Perfect years. The man who had once embodied wrestling perfection was fighting battles that went far beyond what fans could see on television. The real tragedy began long before anyone realized how serious his problems had become. Curt Hennig had everything a wrestler could want: talent, charisma, athletic ability, and the respect of his peers. But success in wrestling often comes with a price that fans never see. Behind the perfect character and technical excellence was a man struggling with pain that went far beyond what happened in the ring. Hennig battled chronic pain after his Summerslam injuries, used prescription painkillers for years, and the medical examiner ruled his death on February 10, 2003 as acute cocaine intoxication. His father later said steroids and painkillers contributed. The back injury from his match with Bret Hart never fully healed. What started as legitimate medical treatment became something much darker. The pills helped him get through matches and appearances, but they also created a dependency that would haunt him for years. The chronic pain affected everything in his life. Simple activities became difficult. Sleep was often impossible. The man who had once been a perfect athlete could barely get through a normal day without medication. He tried different treatments and therapies, but nothing gave him lasting relief. Wrestling had given him fame and money, but it had also destroyed his body in ways that couldn't be repaired. Reports also document run-ins with the law and increasing personal problems in his later years. Financial problems created stress and embarrassment. The perfectionist who had once demanded excellence from everyone around him was falling apart. Friends and family watched helplessly as he struggled with demons that were bigger than any wrestling storyline. His death at age 44 shocked the wrestling world and highlighted the industry's darker side. The news hit the wrestling community like a punch to the gut. Here was a man who had entertained millions of fans and inspired countless wrestlers. He was gone at an age when he should have been enjoying retirement or working as a trainer. Years of prescription drug abuse had led to harder substances. The pain that started with a wrestling injury had consumed his entire life. His influence on technical wrestling and heel psychology can still be seen in today's performers. Wrestlers study his matches to learn timing and storytelling. His ability to make opponents look good while staying strong himself became a template that others follow. The Mr. Perfect character showed how arrogance could be entertaining when backed up by genuine skill. Modern heels still use techniques that Hennig perfected decades ago. The Summerslam 1991 match with Bret Hart remains a masterclass in wrestling storytelling and technical execution. Wrestling schools use this match to teach students about psychology and pacing. Every move had a purpose. Every sequence built toward the conclusion. It represents everything that was great about Hennig's approach to wrestling. Technical excellence combined with emotional storytelling that connected with audiences. His son Curtis Axel's WWE career keeps the Hennig name alive, though he never reached his father's heights. Curtis inherited some of his father's athletic ability and ring awareness. But lightning rarely strikes twice in wrestling families. The expectations were enormous and probably unfair. Still, seeing a Hennig in a WWE ring reminds fans of what his father accomplished and what might have been. He was posthumously inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame in 2007, with peers including Bret Hart and Hulk Hogan widely noted for praising his work and contributions to the business. His family accepted the honor on his behalf. Wrestling legends spoke about his talent and his impact on the industry. But everyone in that room knew this should have been Curt Hennig's moment to celebrate a career well-lived. Wrestling historians consistently rank Mr. Perfect among the greatest performers never to win a world championship. The man who claimed to be perfect was ultimately all too human, with flaws and circumstances that shaped a career filled with both triumph and unfulfilled promise. The lessons from Curt Hennig's career extend far beyond his individual story. Many peers and historians view Hennig as one of the best performers never to win a world title. His in-ring excellence, injuries, and backstage dynamics combined to keep him from reaching the top. His technical excellence and character work set a standard that wrestlers still strive to match today. Wrestlers and trainers still study his matches. His SummerSlam 91 bout with Bret Hart is a teaching tool for timing and psychology. The real tragedy isn't just that he died young at 44. The tragedy is that circumstances prevented him from achieving his full potential when he was at his peak. Wrestling lost one of its greatest performers. Let us know your favorite Curt Hennig moment in the comments and subscribe for more deep-profile wrestling documentaries. Like and subscribe for 100 years of luck. Until next time.